it is the final of the Great British Bake Off this week. So excited. Come on, Andrew. That's all I'm gonna say. Come on, Andrew, gingers unite. And what better excuse than to use some science to solve 3 baking disasters. The first thing we're gonna do is look at the science of gluten. And so to illustrate this, I'm just gonna start nice and simple and make some jam tarts. I've got double the amount of flour to butter. And then first step is rub the fat into the flour. And there we go, got breadcrumbs there. So at the moment, our mixes are the same. Now to make it into a dough, we have to add a small amount of water. Because what we're doing now is we are activating the gluten. It's odd, but flour doesn't really contain gluten. What it does contain are the 2 proteins, glutenin and gliadin, which together will make gluten. The way that those 2 proteins come together is firstly with water. Water has to touch the flour, which is why for a short crust pastry where we want very little gluten, we wanted to coat the flour in fat. So now I've brought both of them just into a ball. For my science one, that's all I'm gonna do. Hands off, I'm just gonna stick this in the fridge to relax, to do as a lassie and just to chill for maybe about half an hour or so. While our scientific dough is chilling, I am going to do the worst possible thing you can do with short crust pastry and work it. You need to work your dough. Oh, you need to work, I'm making puns without even realizing. One of the things that builds up gluten is mechanical working. So literally just shaping the dough, moving it all around. It helps those proteins come together and it helps build up the structure of that network. This is where you can do the window pane test.
I'm just doing something called the window pane test. So I just want to see if enough gluten's been formed to stretch out the dough to be able to see through it without it breaking, which is the point at which I know it's ready to prove.
This is very much what you want for a bread dough or phyllo pastry, but short crust, it's called short because you want it to fall apart into lots of little pieces. You don't want gluten. Gluten means sticky in Latin. And you don't want sticky jam tarts. Well, you do want sticky jam tarts, but you don't want a sticky pastry. You want a flaky bottom. What was it they called it?
Baked in a buttery, flaky crust.
So now our doughs have had a little bit of chance to firm up, the butter solidify. And for this one, which is the one made without science, i.e. we worked it a lot, you can see how elastic that is. Whereas this one, the one made with science, where we're trying to avoid making gluten, it just breaks. It's so crumbly. So now all we've got to do is roll them out and actually make the jam tarts. So there are jam tarts, and they will go in the oven at 180 degrees C. If you use Fahrenheit, go away. This is a science YouTube program. So next up, we're going to do a Genoese or Genoise sponge. Not gonna lie, never made one before. But fingers crossed, we're not going to get the solid, rubbery sponge that Candice got when we apply some science.
So you've got your 2 Genoese here.
Yeah, which are going to go in the bin.
Why?
Because they're like rubber.
Frisbee, go on.
Shall I?
Knock yourself out, go on.
It's light and fluffy, but without an added raising agent. And the way you get that is with a load of eggs. So to each one, we're going to have 4 whole eggs. Now, starting with the non-scientific bowl, we're just gonna start whisking. But first, remember to add your sugar. I wish I could have the excuse that this is live TV in a baking competition. It's not. Now, were I an unscientific baker, I would probably leave this mix here because it's grown a lot in size. For our scientific version, first I'm gonna remember to add the sugar at the beginning. And then we're gonna whip it up again for about 7 minutes or so. So what's going on here? So eggs are full of protein, and proteins are these tangled, complicated strands. And the outside of the protein swims around in water, and the inside of the protein is, there's no water on the inside of a protein. When you whisk up eggs and the protein in the eggs, you're incorporating little air bubbles. And this means that you've got, your protein can either be in air or it can be in water. The bits of the protein that love the water try and stay in the water bit of this foam, whereas the bits that hate water try and stay in the air bit of the foam. And so you've got all these proteins that are supporting these tiny bubbles. So the first thing we have to do is add the plain flour. I'm gonna go all Selassie and just chuck it in without sieving, straight from the pot. And then adding our butter, I'm just gonna pour this in. it's still quite warm, and you can see that it's just gone straight through the egg foam there. And because this is the non-scientific one, I'm going to add it from a height. So now my scientific one. The point is to keep all the bubbles. So, like Mary Berry said, you have to sift your flour. And while that's half incorporated, I want to add a spoonful of the mix to the butter. Now, egg yolks are an amazing emulsifier, so they help oil and water to mix. And so by mixing in some of the eggs with the butter, it helps to emulsify that butter, so it should mix with our wet, water-based mix a bit better. Grab my tin, and then I'm going to pop this in the oven. And lastly, I'm going to make caramel. First off, we're going to try the non-scientific method. We've seen Andrew failing catastrophically with his crystallized sugar.
Caramel's crystallising. I'm already on my second one.
We've got half a cup of caster sugar. Add to that 2 tablespoons roughly. So table sugar is sucrose, and there are lots of different types of sugar. And sucrose isn't just a simple sugar, it's 2 different sugars stuck together. You've got glucose and you've got fructose. And when we added the water into the sugar here, as we start to boil off that water, we'll form a super saturated solution of sugar. There's basically not enough water to hold all of the sugar that's trying to stay in solution. And then given the slightest possibility, this sugar will jump out of solution, which is crystallizing, it'll form a solid. And when I say given the slightest opportunity, this is called giving it a nucleation site. So crystals like to form around other crystals. So if you give it a few crystals to start it going, then it'll be like, woohoo, party, and they'll all rush together. I'm having to do my utmost best to try and seed these crystals. You can see that that is my crystallized sugar.
It's crystallized.
It's done it again.
It's just kind of lumps of solid sugar. Still, I need to try something, so I'm going to try and do Andrew's hazelnut with spikes, phalluses.
Jousting pole.
Hazelnut in here. Go. For the sciencey way of doing it, we want to avoid crystallization if at all possible. Add your sugar, half a cup of sugar, a few splashes of water, and this time a tiny drizzle of lemon juice. The acid of the lemon juice helps break up the sucrose into its components, glucose and fructose, 2 simpler sugars. And those simple sugars flying around don't make it as easy for a regular structure to form. They kind of get in the way and stop it from forming nice crystals. And then leave it. Do not touch it, do not stir it. Hardly look at it. Because what we're doing now is we're trying to avoid anything from setting off the sucrose from crystallizing out. Stick in some hazelnuts. So after a whole day of cooking in the kitchen, we have got the results of science versus no science bake-off. And what a difference you can see here. These are our Genoese sponges, and it's quite easy to see which one's better. This one was made knocking all of the air out of that egg foam. So adding the butter in hotter, not sifting the flour, not whisking until the ribbon stage to let those egg proteins stabilize the foam. This was done with science, with all of these, and I mean, this is solid. This is basically, like, you could hit someone with this. So let's try it. The proof is in the pudding. This is the non-sciencey one. Oh, it's very dense. If I was Paul Hollywood, I'd say it's very close textured. I don't think even Mary could say something nice about that. This, on the other hand, oh, that is so much lighter, and you can see how light and spongy it is. It's amazing. Now the jam tarts. So at first glance, they look very similar. Let's start with the one made without science. So this is the one where we're looking at the science of gluten, and I kneaded the dough for 10 minutes beforehand. So there's no crumbling there at all. It's very chewy. Whereas this one, which is the one where we try to work it as little as possible, so the least amount of mechanical action for the least amount of gluten, we break this. You can see that just falls apart. And it just melts in the mouth. And then finally, we have the caramel toppings. I think it's fair to say that even Mary couldn't call this informal. Whereas I think Andrew's Knights would be proud to boast a spike this long, and that was just from not disturbing the sugar and not forming any nucleation points. So overall, I think it's safe to say that even if you've never really baked much before, I mean, I've made jam tarts a lot, but I've never made Genoese and I've never made caramel. But if you just have a little bit of science, you know about gluten, you know about egg foam, and you know about crystallization, then maybe you can be the next star baker and even the champion of Bake Off. Which leads me to say good luck to the 3 finalists on Wednesday, and come on, Andrew! Yes!